Get yourself a brew, lads. Today is going to be a belting story. Who's that bloke? Yep, the ballsy bugger waving the colours from on top of the enemy ramparts. Well, that's the question that started my research for today's film. Who is he, what's he doing, and what happened to him later in life? Firstly, guys, before we begin, I have to say thank you to one of you guys for today's story. Jerry McCabe told me about this man and sent me a very, very rare book about him. So thanks to Jerry. Oh, and by the way, Jerry says they're not related. You'll understand that comment a bit later. Let's start off by analysing this picture. It's a classic painting of hard-as-nails infantrymen storming an enemy position. The redcoats are doing what they've done for centuries, outnumbered and outgunned, but still charging forward. Good lads. These men have the white facings of the 31st Regiment of Foot, the Huntingdonshires. Where's Huntingdonshire, I hear you ask? Well, I had no idea either, so I had to Google it. Turns out it was the third smallest English county in terms of population until it was merged with Cambridgeshire in 1972. Good, we've put that to bed. Let's move on. So who are they fighting in the picture? Well, as you can probably tell by the beards and the turbans, it's the Sikhs. Some of the toughest warriors the British have ever faced. Luckily, in later years, they ended up fighting alongside us. Let's drill down even further. This is the Battle of Sobraon, fought on the 10th of February 1846. It was the first Anglo-Sikh war, a tough scrap if ever there was one. If you want to know more about that war, then I'll put links below to my other videos on it, but today we're going to stay focused on this brave man. At Sobraon, the Sikhs were well dug in. They'd built formidable earthworks. But the British Commander-in-Chief, yep, this chap, Sir Hugh Gough, was convinced that the British infantrymen could overcome all odds and, true to form, threw his redcoats forward. With his 3rd and 2nd divisions unable to batter their way into the Sikh fortress, Sir Harry Smith's 1st Division was called upon to try and rescue the battle. The 1st Brigade of Smith's Division contained the 24th Native Infantry and the 31st Foot. With the 31st that day was none other but our hero, Sergeant Bernard McCabe. McCabe, like many British soldiers of the era, was an Irishman, or at least we do know he was of Irish descent. He'd joined up anyway in Huddersfield in 1839, and in 6 years of service had now become the Sergeant of the Light Company. Anyway, the 1st Brigade stormed forward into a hail of musket and cannon fire. Their first charge was checked, and the 2nd Brigade, including the 50th Regiment of Foot, was sent forward in support. But as the 31st were reforming, it's said that the Sikhs, whose blood was up, came out of their entrenchment and began killing the wounded. This spurred the 31st into action once more, and they charged forward again looking for revenge. The officers of the colour party, so obvious in the heat of battle, were cut down almost immediately. It was then that Lieutenant Noel took the Queen's colour and Sergeant McCabe grasped the regimental colour and rushed forward. McCabe, under an intense fire, scrambled to the top of the Sikh earthworks and waved his colour triumphantly. The colour head was shot off and the colours themselves were riddled with bullets, but somehow McCabe managed to survive. His action inspired the men around him and filled them with a determination to succeed. His divisional commander, Sir Harry Smith, said it was one of the most bold and daring acts of a gallant soldier he ever witnessed. And if anyone should know, he should. He was a veteran of Battle in the Peninsular War and had even been at Waterloo. He knew bravery when he saw it. Meanwhile, a brutal hand-to-hand fight now ensued. The Sikhs were tough as nails, and it took a grim determination from the men of the 31st, the 50th and the Sepoy regiments to finally batter them into submission over the next few hours. Sergeant McCabe had in fact done a quite incredible thing. It went beyond simple bravery. It was very rare in the 19th century for a lower rank to completely change the course of a battle through his actions. But that's exactly what Sergeant McCabe was able to do through his brave deed. The British Army had been staring failure in the face, but they were inspired and rejuvenated by his demonstration with the colours. The Commander-in-Chief, Sir Hugh Gough, was so impressed that he immediately wrote to Horse Guards in London requesting that McCabe's conduct be rewarded with a commission. How's your tea going down? I'm enjoying this. Even the Duke of Wellington, who had become very, very conservative as he got older, couldn't argue with McCabe being promoted. Soon afterwards, he became an ensign in the 18th Foot. But please don't think that's the end of the story. A man like McCabe does not rest on his laurels. With the 18th, he swapped India and went to China.
By the way, gents, if you love this sort of military history, then please do consider signing up for my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/redcoathistory. It's currently just $5 a month, and for that you get all of my content early, about 2 weeks before it gets released on YouTube, plus it's ad-free. It's also a great way to keep in touch with me, so if that sounds like your sort of thing, please check it out. Any money I raise there will go towards helping to make more fantastic content, get to more battlefields, and to keep these stories alive. Alright, back to the film.
In April 1847, he saw action in a brief campaign to bombard Chinese forts and factories along the Canton River. But it wasn't much of a fight, and shortly afterwards the regiment was headed to India. Then newly promoted Lieutenant McCabe transferred to the 32nd Regiment of Foot, now remembered as the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry. McCabe then drops off the radar for a while, but of course 1857, the torch is lit and India explodes. The Indian Revolt, the Indian Mutiny begins, and McCabe is in the heart of it. McCabe and the 32nd were part of the force besieged here at the Residency in Lucknow. I was lucky enough to visit last year, and I highly recommend getting there if you can. The regiment were mauled at the Battle of Chinhut on the 30th of June, and this meant that our hero was soon promoted to captain. I think it's worth quoting from Colonel Sewell's book about McCabe here. He says, "Throughout the whole of this dreadful time, it would seem that Bernard McCabe was a tower of strength, and in histories of the defence there are invariably references to him. The historian of the 32nd Regiment, writing in 1912, referred to him as a most gallant officer who, even among the many whose valour was conspicuous during this eventful period, was particularly distinguished. A first special occasion when his gallantry is recorded took place on the 10th of August, when the rebels made their second general assault on the defence. As part of this, they sprang a mine near Johanna's house, and this entirely destroyed the outer wall of the Martiniere garrison and blew up over 50 feet of palisades and defences. Following this, a party of the enemy rushed through and seized the bottom cellar part of Martiniere's house, and grave fears were entertained that they might establish themselves in the house within the perimeter line. However, McCabe took charge in the top part of the house. By dropping hand grenades through holes in the floor, he soon made it too hot for the intruders and they fled, leaving 3 dead, and so the perimeter was once again made good." Balls of steel. And this isn't the only one. There was a whole long list of times where McCabe showed his bravery, his valour, during that siege. Over and over again he proved his mettle with incredible aggression and an unwillingness to allow the mutineers to take the initiative. There was one time when the rebels attacked a post named as Sago's house. The lieutenant in charge of that position came and asked McCabe for support. McCabe's soldiers were already also overstretched in their own position, and he couldn't really spare anyone. But what he did was he ran forward himself towards the sepoys, shouting, "Number 1 will advance, number 2 will support, number 3 in reserve." This did the job. The sepoys assumed there was a large company-sized detachment at least running towards them, and they pulled back. The sham had worked. Sadly, Captain McCabe's luck wasn't to last. At the end of September, he led a sortie out of the Residency compound to spike enemy guns at the Phillips House Garden Battery. In a brutal fight with the desperate rebels, he was badly wounded. One of the ladies besieged at Lucknow later wrote of the incident, "Mr. McCabe was told off to lead. John," she means Colonel Inglis here, commander of the 32nd, protested the selection, saying he had already led 3 sorties and it was not fair to take him again. But General Outram said he must have him. The affair was far from successful. Only 7 guns were spiked and our loss was most severe." 7 guns sounds like a lot to me, but anyway, she carries on. "Poor McCabe was parried past our door, shot through the lungs. Mr. Edmonston of the 32nd was slightly wounded. The latter, i.e. McCabe, behaved most bravely, having with 3 of the 32nd rushed forward to spike a gun when a good many others fell back. He and 2 of the men were hit. The remaining one spiked the gun, an act worthy of the VC. Poor John was sadly cut up at Mr. McCabe being so badly hit. No hopes were entertained of his life. His men dragged him back into the Residency compound, but he was too badly wounded. He died 3 days later on the 1st of October 1857. His death was a sad loss for the regiment. He was a warrior to the core, a man of action, and an officer who had pulled himself up from lowly beginnings. Private Metcalfe of the 32nd, another contemporary of McCabe, wrote of him, "He was one of the most indefatigable officers in the garrison, and one in whom the brigadier placed great confidence, and indeed which was well deserved." Like most British soldiers of the era, he was buried in a nameless grave. But his regiment placed a special memorial tablet to him in Lucknow church, extolling his conspicuous gallantry during the siege and recalling his bravery at Sobraon. According to the Queen's Royal Surrey's website, his medal for the Afghan War, the First Sikh War and the Mutiny, together with his swords, are held at the Regimental Museum of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry at Bodmin.
And another interesting fact, guys, before we wrap up, is that the Queen's Regiment on the Battle of Sobraon, the 10th of February, would have a ceremony where the regimental colour of the 1st Battalion was marched from the officers' mess to the warrant officers' and sergeants' mess. The battalion lined the route and the colour was carried by the Sobraon sergeant, who was selected by the RSM as the outstanding sergeant of the previous 12 months. According to their website, this commemorated the action of Sergeant Bernard McCabe of the 31st, of course, as we know. I think that says a lot about the impact this man made during his short life.
Captain Bernard McCabe, it's been an honour to learn about your story and to be able to share it here today. You truly were a man amongst men, and you are remembered.